you're just tuning in, I've mentioned this a couple of times recently, but today is my last show on 790 The Ticket or 560 WQAM, as I've accepted a full-time job outside of radio. I'm choosing to leave, so I'm departing on my own terms, which is uncommon in this business, and this is something that I've been working towards for months, and knew it was going to be a difficult decision should I ultimately have to make it, because I absolutely love sports broadcasting. I especially love sports talk radio, and it's a platform and vessel for long-form storytelling, in-depth conversation and debate, which is sometimes serious and meaningful, sometimes silly and fun, and overall exciting and exhilarating in the sense that you get a chance to express your opinion and facilitate discussion on the topic we all love, sports, which is the ultimate reality TV show playing out live before our eyes, and this job allows you to react and analyze and have fun with whatever's in the headlines both locally and nationally. I remember growing up and having a radio in my room as a teenager and going to sleep listening to sports talk radio and getting up in the morning and flipping on local or national radio, both in Chicago and then when I moved to South Florida. It's something I've been fascinated by and entertained by for the majority of my life. And that's why, as I've reflected back over the last week or so in anticipation of these final shows, the feeling that kept popping up is how appreciative I am of the opportunities my broadcasting career has provided. Now, that has included a lot of hard work and the help of many to create those opportunities, but this business is unique in that if that all lines up, you can be exposed to some terrific life-altering experiences. For those that don't know, I got my first real exposure to the sports media landscape in South Florida as an intern at NBC6 here in town. Shout out to Chris Clark, longtime executive producer of both sports and weather at NBC6. I interviewed with him as a college student and landed an internship in the sports department in the summer of 2004. That's where I met Joe Rose, and Joe was accustomed to interns that, strangely enough, didn't know anything about sports. There were a lot of interns that passed through NBC6 at that time that were looking to get their foot in the door, but ultimately wanted to be in news. So the first time I went out in the field with Joe, we went to a Patrick Surtain charity event at a barber shop/salon, and on the car ride, Joe quizzed me and asked me all sorts of questions about the Dolphins and the local sports teams, and I had all the answers, and he was impressed. And ended up having a great summer, helped out on the Sunday Night Sports Final show, among other duties, learned a lot, and fast forward to the next summer, Joe Rose asked me to intern with him at a fledgling 790 The Ticket, where he had recently started as the morning drive host at this station, looking to shake up the status quo in a town that had been dominated by 560 WQAM in the sports talk radio realm. That was an eye-opening experience, as I would learn quickly that radio is a different ballgame than television on so many fronts. I absorbed a lot, both good and bad, about the business over the course of that summer. And of the highlights, I look back on that summer, and we had this great opportunity to have Don Shula come in studio to be interviewed by Joe. And before the interview began, Coach Shula needed to visit the men's room. I was asked to show him how to get there. So I'm walking through the hallways, escorting and making small talk with the winningest coach in NFL history. It's pretty random, but how cool is that? Also, I earned my longtime nickname during this period of Young Greg, which was actually given to me by Jeff DeForest. Defo coined that, and Joe Rose and Zach Krantz ran with it, and people still call me that to this day at 35 years old. Fast forward to the next summer, I graduated from Syracuse University and applied to numerous television jobs in small markets across the country. At that time, I really wanted to be a sports reporter or anchor at a local TV station. I almost accepted a job offer from a station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to be on TV there, but decided to take up Joe Rose's offer to be an associate producer on the morning show. Simultaneously, I started working at NBC6 in the production department, and that began over a year of working both the morning radio show and late shift in TV. I'd be up before sunrise each day, take a brief midday nap, and would be out of work close to midnight from the TV station. It was a grind, but it was all for the purpose of forging a career path in this business that I was determined to be successful in, and was aware that you have to work hard and sacrifice early on in order for there to be a long-term payoff. At least that was my mindset. I ended up leaving NBC6 a little over a year later. In that time, Joe had decided to move his show from 560 WQAM, from 790 The Ticket to 560 WQAM, and I went with him. At QAM, I was offered the opportunity to cover the Miami Dolphins. That's when I left the TV station and began working as an update anchor, producer, and reporter for WQAM. And during that time, I was able to be around not just Joe, but Jim Mandich and Hank Goldberg and Ed Kaplan and Big O and Jason Jackson and later George Sedano, lots of accomplished, talented people. But as the Dolphins beat reporter, that really began my long-standing relationship with the Miami Dolphins. At that time, I also negotiated with program director Josh Darrow that I could have my own show once a week. I was working 80 hours per week between the morning show and the reporting, but I ultimately wanted to gain on-air experience. And the verbal agreement we came up with was that I could do a show on Friday nights during football season. So, some of you may have heard me on my first solo journeys as a radio host from 10 p.m. to midnight or 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. on Friday nights. And that proved pivotal because, I wasn't very good, but it provided me with much-needed valuable reps and experience. And that show eventually turned into my own shows on Saturdays and Sundays. It turned into Dolphins pregame and postgame shows. It turned into hosting Dolphins player shows, including programs with Channing Crowder when he was still a player, Ronnie Brown, Devon Best, Brian Hartline, Jared Odrick, and even Ricky Williams. I also did shows with Lamar Thomas and Randall Hill. And by the way, Channing and I ended up as broadcast partners years later on WQAM's Countdown to Kickoff Dolphins pregame show, which we did for a couple of seasons after he retired from football and turned into a full-time broadcaster. Other highlights while at WQAM, all of the morning show hijinks of being on the Joe Rose Show, with my personal life being put out there for the world to hear, good and bad, making fun of Joe's giant head, which I'll still give him a hard time about, writing and recording some dumb/funny creative songs and bits like the Bosch song and the Heat Lottery rap, and every morning I remember there was an energy, an excitement level, and a feeling that we were entertaining and informing the audience as everyone started their days for work or school or wrapped up the night shift. It felt like we served a real purpose. By the way, in studio we had Dwayne Wade and Alonzo Mourning come by, Glenn Rice, James Jones, Elio Castroneves, Patrick Peterson, Bruce Bowen, just to name some of the folks who got up early with us in person. And I had the opportunity to cover 2 Super Bowl radio rows and attended Super Bowl 44, which saw the Saints beat the Colts. I was on the field with confetti falling down on the Saints. Absolutely awesome. At the first radio row I took part in down at the Miami Beach Convention Center, I got to meet Donovan McNabb. And as a Syracuse fan my whole life and a proud alum of the university, that was a real thrill. After 7 years at WQAM and having served in virtually every role on and off the air on the programming side of the radio station, I was hired as the host of the Finsiders. And this was a moment in which it felt like all of the hard work and the hours that I'd put in were really paying off. It was a terrific opportunity working for the Dolphins organization as the host of their daily 3-hour multimedia show. We were heard on the radio, seen on TV, and also broadcast online. As part of my application process, Dan Marino was nice enough to record an audio message supporting my candidacy for the job. He was a weekly guest of ours on the Joe Rose Show during football season, and as a show, we would meet up with Dan on a number of occasions for lunch. So I explained to him that I was applying for this job with the Dolphins, and he agreed to meet up with me one day and recorded a few lines, which I'm sure didn't hurt my cause. But who would have thought when I first started in this business that Dan Marino, of all people, would be a reference of mine for a job? Absolutely crazy. I had a blast hosting the Finsiders, doing videos for Dolphins.com and hosting the pre-halftime and post-game shows on game days on the Miami Dolphins radio network. We had great access to the players and coaches over the 2 seasons I was there, and I interviewed nearly every meaningful member of the Dolphins organization, past and present. Marino, Ndamukong Suh, Don Shula, Jason Taylor, Cam Wake, Ryan Tannehill, Jarvis Landry, Adam Gase, Zach Thomas, Bob Greasy, Dwight Stevenson, the list goes on and on and on. I also covered Super Bowls 49 and 50. But what really made that job special were the people I worked with on a daily basis. John Cope was our executive producer, and to this day is one of the most professional people I've been around in this business and the best producer that I've worked with. We had a great crew behind the scenes as well, like Logan McCall, Ed Pino, and Trey Freeman, and the co-hosts that I had the privilege of working with were absolutely tremendous. Sam Madison, O.J. McDuffie, John Congemi, Troy Drayton, Chris Chambers, Twan Russell, Kim Bocamper, Keith Sims, Tristan Jones, and Troy Stratford. Everyone had their own personality and areas of expertise when it came to breaking down football, and we all had a blast, even when the team wasn't playing so well. And the reason I mentioned Troy Stratford last is because I've been fortunate enough to continue working with him at WQAM over the last couple of years, and as time goes by, his predictions don't get any better. When the Finsiders show was discontinued due to a renegotiation of radio rights, it was tough for me and my colleagues. It's never fun to lose your job, and it's difficult when you're told it was strictly a business move and not a performance issue. I remain steadfast in my belief that the Dolphins made a big mistake in making that decision, and not so much because I was personally affected by it, but with the benefit of time to reflect, they created a void for their fan base that really hasn't been filled. What me and my colleagues provided was long-form conversation, coverage, insight, and access to the team that no one else has provided in the same way since. It's unfortunate for the fans from around the world that the organization took that away because they haven't offered anything comparable since we were taken off the air. On a side note, around the time I lost that job, I did receive a note in the mail that contained money in it. I still don't know exactly who it was from, but it was a touching gesture that meant a lot to me. At the time, I tweeted a thank you about it, but whoever it was, I hope you hear this and know how much that anonymous, kind gesture was appreciated. After my time with the Finsiders ended, I did some freelance work and eventually found my way back to 790 The Ticket, 11 years after I'd gotten my first job out of school at the station. Crazy. Things come back around. I've been working here and at 560 with the stations now being under the same ownership for over 2.5 years, and have really enjoyed the opportunity and especially my interaction with the audience. Need to mention a few people. Josh Friedman, who unfortunately is no longer here working for the station, but he was the driving force, to get me on the air on 790. If it weren't for him, I don't know if I'd be speaking to you right now over these airwaves. So a big thanks to him both professionally and as a friend. Another friend who has been always in my corner while navigating this crazy business is Adam Beasley. You hear him on the air talking Dolphins, and yes, he is absolutely an expert there, but he's also a really, really good person. Have to mention the co-hosts I've had here on 790 and 560, whether on my shows or while filling in for others in no particular order. Channing Crowder, Troy Stratford, DJ Williams, Damian Lewis, Manny Navarro, Mark Hochman, Chris Perkins, Curtis Stevenson, Alex Dono, Zach Duarte, Joe Zagacki, Ira Winderman, Antoine Staley, Dave Hyde. Hopefully I'm not forgetting anyone, but certainly apologize if I did. And especially Barry Jackson, who's like a walking sports encyclopedia and a good friend. Brian Monroe, who, let's face it, I had to come to terms with early on. He's just cooler than the rest of us, right? But he's a very talented guy with a bright future in this business. Then my most frequent co-host on these weekend shows, Rashad Butler, who is genuinely one of the nicest guys you'll meet, former professional athlete or otherwise. And I'll miss talking sports, food, and whatever other nonsense comes our way during these fun weekend shifts. Also, there have been countless producers over the years, some better than others, but all vital to make the show go. The good ones know who you are, and thank you for your hard work. All right. This next part could get tough. But outside of radio, the other very important people in my life are my parents, Matt and Nancy, who have been supported from day one when I did a project my freshman year of high school saying I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. They've been tremendous sounding boards for me over the years, diehard listeners to the show via the online stream, and most of you are aware of the fact that my dad has actually made multiple appearances on my show as a guest over the last couple of years, which has been a major thrill for us both. Thank you very much to them. My sister Alexa has also been extremely supportive. She even streamed one of my shows when she was studying abroad in Europe years ago. She and her husband Peter just welcomed my niece and goddaughter Bryn into the world. Thank you to them for all of their support. I don't have a huge extended family, but have to mention my Uncle Stan, Uncle Wally, and Sue, who are avid listeners, along with my cousin Steven. Shout out to his family, as well as Aunt Marla and Uncle Bob. My friends, too many of you to name. I appreciate you all, but I will mention Brian and Mary, who live in South Florida and whose engagement and wedding were the subject of fodder on the Joe Rose Show for a long period of time. Also, my buddy Nick Friedel. Didn't know when we were roommates together at Syracuse that he'd one day be a guest on my radio show. Keep doing your thing, man. Thank you very much to all my friends. Last but not least, my beautiful fiancée, Jen. She understands everything I've been through these last few years and the difficult time I had coming to this decision. She and I have had many career conversations, probably more than she really wanted, and she and I are getting married next year. I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with her. Her mom, Omi, her grandma, or abuelita as we call her, have always been very supportive. Muchas gracias to them. I can't thank people without mentioning all the listeners, the viewers, and followers out there. The audience is what made this journey really so much fun. I don't consider myself some sort of big shot because I'm on the radio, and this business has a way of humbling most people. But I do know that there are loyal listeners to this program. There were loyal consumers of the Finsiders. There were loyal listeners to the Joe Rose Show when I was on it, and the shows I did when I first got started. I have thousands of followers on social media. There are always a significant number of interactions via the text line when I'm on the air. Some of you may not be the biggest fans of mine, but I do know that there are plenty that are. The fact is that there's a divide perhaps there. That means I must have done something right. At the end of the day, anyone who has taken the time to listen over the years, thank you so much. If you've texted me or tweeted at me, all I can do is say Thank you. So, that gets back to my decision. I'm leaving radio for another opportunity outside of the media world. I'm actually quite excited about it, and it's the best decision for me both personally and professionally at this juncture of my life. It'll be a brand new challenge in a different industry that is needed after 13 years in sports broadcasting. The good news is I'm staying in the area. I'm not moving, so if you happen to see me around South Florida, please say hello. Also, I'm not going to stop transmitting my opinion or information to the world. If you're not already, give me a follow on Twitter, at Greg Likens, GregLikens, Instagram, at Greg.Likens. I also have a YouTube channel that you can access via my Twitter account. I'll continue to be active via those avenues, especially during games and big sporting events. Just to wrap this up, a couple of really cool full-circle moments for my career came in the last 2 years. When I appeared as a guest host on NBC6's Sports Final with Chris Fisher. I was featured on that show that I interned on back in college. You imagine all those years later, and I'm on TV after being behind the scenes. Just incredible. Which gets back to my overriding point and feeling. I'm really appreciative of all the opportunities this career has provided. Meeting the likes of Dwayne Wade, Don Shula, Donovan McNabb, just to name a few. Chris Bosh said over the airwaves of South Florida that he liked the Bosh song that I wrote and performed. I had Dan Marino support my candidacy for a job. I was sitting in a recliner in the defensive line meeting room at the Dolphins facility with Cam Wake. I covered 4 Super Bowls and an NBA Finals. And I had my dad on as a guest on my radio shows. It doesn't get much cooler than that. I mean, I could go on, but the bottom line is I'm sad to be signing off, but very proud and appreciative of all the experiences I take with me and very excited about the future. Thank you very much.